Hi everyone, I'm Kathryn Kilianska. I'm the Trauma Informed Practice Lead Officer for Inverclyde Council. I've been asked to talk today about some of the work that we've been doing around taking a trauma-informed approach to policies and processes. I have talked previously about some bits of this in an earlier input to this group where it crosses over with some of our work around leadership and culture. So apologies for any repetition in this, but I will hopefully include some more detail and some updates on where we're at and what we're planning to do next as well. So within our council strategy for trauma-informed practice, the kind of strategy is based around four themes based on the drivers from the roadmap. And we have left policies and processes as a theme in its own right, really recognising actually how all-encompassing and impactful this area of work can be. And our wider objective for this was for all of the council's relevant policies and processes to really reflect an understanding of the impact of trauma, and that should apply to every policy and process you might come into contact with, whether you are a member of the wider community or a member of staff. We had a few main actions that we wanted to take forward to help us hopefully move towards this objective. The first was to start identifying some existing good practice, both within our own organisation and within other organisations and agencies. So I spoke to lots of different areas of the council to look at what the policies are currently like, and also looking at lots of examples that have come from third sector partners who talk to me about policies that they have around both staff wellbeing, relating to end of day check-ins and supportive debriefs following challenging situations, as well as flexible bereavement support for staff. Also for people accessing services, things like open door policies, making sure that people know they can always return to access support even if they might not feel able to at the moment, and policies that ensure that feedback is embedded in the way that the service is designed and delivered. So for me, the common thread that I was finding running through the majority of the examples that I was seeing was not necessarily a specific protocol or something that was service specific. It was that they all were featuring that compassion and flexibility that I think can hopefully, in theory, easily be transferred into just about any policy that you could think of in quite a straightforward way. So we're kind of continuing to learn from that and looking at how we can bring that into looking at our own policies and practices within the council. One of the first things that we did when we started looking at our strategic group and our plan was to think about having HR and organisational development represented in that group, and also starting the process of discussing how we could tie in with their existing schedules for reviewing policies and processes so that we used it as an opportunity to kind of take a trauma-informed lens when a policy was already being looked at, rather than it feeling like an onerous extra task that we were asking for. And we were really lucky to have a brilliant OD advisor, Hannah, who was nominated to be our key link, because she's been so instrumental in helping us take forward a number of pieces of work with this. So we now do have a process where wherever the policy is coming up for review, HR and OD will share this with our strategic group for feedback. And up until recently, we didn't necessarily have a structured plan for what that process looked like, other than for each person to apply their own understanding of a trauma-informed lens, and to give comments and suggestions based on that. And we are about to trial some guidance documents that we'll talk about in a little bit, just to help us to really create some consistency in that process and give a little bit of guidance for if we were widening this out to other members of the council who are looking at policies, to have a bit of a consistent approach that we can share with people. So I'll talk about that in a moment, but the first policy that we did take through was the annual appraisal process. And I did already talk about this at a previous input, so I won't go into a lot of detail on it, just to give that quick overview. But Hannah had already begun the process of looking at the appraisal process when we brought her into the group, and already had a draft of a positive conversations was the new name of the process. And when she shared that draft with us, it already showed so much consideration and compassionate language and person-centered language, and really reflected a trauma-informed approach. So it was really refreshing to see that it didn't require lots of going back and forth with edits. So I'll show just a few parts of that policy just as a reminder. It's replacing the current or the old appraisal system that we had that was very much more focused on rating employees on a scale around competencies, and the language that was used was quite corporate and quite impersonal and focused more on KPIs and requirements rather than encouraging more of an opportunity for discussion about anything more individual or person-centred. So Positive Conversations has been structured around these three main questions of what has gone well over the last year, what might have gone better, and what do you want to achieve in the year ahead, with some suggested prompts for like questions that you could ask under those domains. But the idea is that it's intended to be quite organic as a conversation, and really flips that conversation on its head and emphasises that well-being and support for staff should be at the forefront of these conversations and not the other way around where they're kind of tagged on at the end. So this is the guidance for the annual appraisal. There's also some guidance for more informal check-ins and also team check-ins that follow a similar approach and just bring in a few different aspects that they might want to be focused around. But again, it's been left quite flexible for people to decide what the key kind of focus of a conversation should be. And that should be a two-way thing with the kind of employee also bringing what they would like to talk about as well. So since it's launched, we've had some feedback and evaluation data that's come in. There was some training and a briefing session that went out to kind of give people the rationale and an understanding of what the new process would look like. And we had, I think, over 240 staff attended that session. Across all directorates in the council, the overwhelming majority of managers have given positive feedback about their experience of bringing in Positive Conversations, with it being kind of felt to be a much more relaxed and personal approach to the appraisal. And what I think is encouraging is that was across all directorates and not just maybe the particular areas where we might expect this type of conversation to feel more natural or to fit better, but this was across the whole range, so that was great. And the feedback has also been that this has felt like a real step away from a process that maybe previously had caused some conflict within working relationships at times and could be seen as a bit of a burden to complete. So this, I think, quite importantly, doesn't feel like a big additional task, but something that can be incorporated into processes like supervision or team meetings as well. So that's the first process that we took through. But just to jump back a bit, I did mention that we are starting to look at a bit of guidance around our process for looking at policies and processes. So we have just developed a draft of this guidance quite recently, with the rationale behind it being, as well as trying to create some consistency, we're also thinking about sustainability and, you know, thinking about the nature of the trauma-informed funding. And, you know, we don't know if the lead post or the strategic group will continue long term. So it's felt like we don't want this just to be reliant on sitting within the strategic group. We want it to be shared wider with the relevant people throughout the organisation. So in order to do this, we wanted to create some guidance that could kind of make an approach that seemed accessible to everybody, to kind of jump into thinking about how they could take this trauma-informed lens. Really helpfully, around the time that we were starting to think about these conversations, the roadmap had been published, and obviously includes a really helpful collation of questions to consider when thinking about policy. So in an effort not to reinvent the wheel, we really took these questions as a basis for our guidance, and we also signpost to the roadmap within the guidance as well. One thing we did do is added an overview of a trauma-informed approach and also some information about the context that that policy might be considered in, particularly in relation to whether it could be considered a traumatised or potentially traumatising policy as well. And then also in the appendices, we included two examples of a theoretical lateness policy, one that was written through a trauma-informed lens and the other that was very much not written through a trauma-informed lens. And I feel sometimes, although we talk about, taking that trauma-informed lens, it can feel quite abstract and people maybe feel a bit unclear about what that actually looks like in practice. So we felt like just having a clear kind of contrast can actually be a really helpful thing for people to see. So I'm not going to go into the whole kind of the two kind of policies that we used for these examples, but just to give you an idea of what was included, this was just the introductory paragraph for the not so trauma-informed policy example. The whole policy was stretched to the point of hopefully being a bit over the top to emphasise the point. So it used really harsh language, like zero tolerance. It refers to negligence, a lack of commitment, being irresponsible, all quite threatening terms that place a lot of the kind of onus on an individual's kind of character. Obviously not showing much compassion or consideration for the whole range of possible difficulties that someone might have in making it to work on time, or anything that the organisation might be able to do to support this. And then just as a contrast, we included a trauma-informed, hopefully it's kind of taken through a trauma-informed lens, version of the policy that uses language and an approach that reduces stigma by recognising that there could be many factors that impact on someone's ability to get to work on time, rather than suggesting it's related to a character flaw. And the policy does then go on to focus on supportive measures that might be put in place. It refers to compassionate accountability and working alongside somebody to overcome challenges while still meeting the operational needs of a service. So hopefully that gives a sense of what we included in that guidance, and the initial feedback from people who've started to kind of test it out has been that it's been really helpful for them to kind of use when looking at their policy. So briefly, just some of the next steps of where we're hoping to go with this. Our next step will be to take the policy guidance to CMT for approval, so that it can be more widely shared throughout the council as a guidance document. And then this is where some of this, again, overlaps with our leadership and culture work. We're in the process of developing a local leaders session that we intend to run regularly as a kind of follow-up from STILT. And we hope to incorporate this policy guidance into that session with a suggested action that somebody might take away from that session to be considering reviewing a policy as one of those actions. We're also planning a trauma-informed leadership conference later in the year, and that's where we hope we can maybe use this as a launch pad for both the leader sessions and for this guidance to become available before following it up with some comms strategy as well, to raise awareness of the guidance and also to help us to start gathering feedback from people who've started to use it, so that we can review and adapt and add and take away as needed, so that it's really kind of dependent on what people are feeling like they need with that guidance. And so just to finish up on a few reflections, some of the challenges that we've had with this has been, just reflective of some of the wider challenges, I suppose, across any areas of work. The sustainability part of this will always be kind of ongoing. The lack of kind of permanent funding always brings up the question of who takes on responsibility of reviewing policy through a trauma-informed lens if the lead officer and the strategic group aren't in place. So we're hoping that developing this guidance will be one step to kind of mitigating that risk, that it kind of falls off the radar. As well as, staff turnover and changing roles, we need to make sure that this gets passed on and the momentum is kept up. But again, that's going to potentially be reliant on goodwill and people handing things over quite consistently as well. So that will be a challenge. And then also although we are only reviewing these policies as they come around for review, and not all at the one go, there's still a considerable time commitment to doing that, in reading and reviewing and returning comments on a policy within a timescale that's often needed. So it can be a big ask of group members and I suppose other colleagues who might take this on in the future as well. But what has helped has been a reminder, for myself, if you know, for nobody else, that progress isn't always linear. That we didn't necessarily have a plan at the outset of how we were going to approach this, and we did take advantage of opportunities as they came. So I think just if we'd had, you know, if we'd planned to take a trauma-informed lens in a really consistent way, we might have missed the opportunity to kind of engage with OD and HR at the time that we did. So the fact that we've gone back to kind of look at that consistent process afterwards, I think has just been part of the nature of the way that this work sometimes runs. So I think that's okay. Even if you're not in the perfect place to start something, you can still kind of work with what you've got. Having the evaluation data from positive conversations has been really great, not only in that it's been reassuring that people are getting a real tangible feel for this, because by now everybody within the council will have had their first appraisal through this different process, and we're starting to see the kind of feedback about that. But it can also help us to kind of evidence that this does make a real difference to people. The roadmap has been really timely and a really helpful resource for us as well, and has helped to guide a lot of the work that we're doing around this. And then lastly, drawing on the knowledge and the skills of others has been vital. I don't have a background in HR or OD or policy, so I've taken a lot of guidance from my colleagues who do work in those areas, and you know, I've been really fortunate that they've been really enthusiastic and passionate about this, and that's the bit, unfortunately, that often relies on a bit of good luck in being able to find your allies in the right places, who have those knowledge, skills and passion to help take things forward. So when you do find them, hang on to them for as long as you can. So I'll leave it there. That's me, but I am happy to be contacted if anybody does want to get in touch about any of that. Please do just let me know, and I hope to see you all soon. Cheers.